So my privilege to introduce to you the President and CEO of Cloud Peak Energy, Colin Marshall. He's going to talk about Montana coal. Colin is President and CEO of Cloud Peak Energy and is responsible for its company operations. Cloud Peak operates 3 Powder River Basin coal mines in Wyoming and Montana. America has a tremendous opportunity with affordable energy, but out-of-touch Washington, D.C. regulations threaten our country's opportunity to build modern power plants, and you hear that very clearly in Karen's presentation. I'm eager to hear Colin share his thoughts on the reliability and affordability of coal for the United States and for the world, and for coal's ability to power the world literally for generations to come. Please give a warm welcome to Colin Marshall.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction, and it's obviously a pleasure to listen to Karen with her views on what's going on. As I said, my name is Colin Marshall. I'm the President and CEO of Cloud Peak Energy. It's obviously my pleasure to speak to you today. I think I was at this summit 2 years ago. As I reflect on what's happened in the last 2 years, it's, not a lot of it's been very favorable for coal, but it's certainly interesting times. I would like to say what I'll first do is put up a slide, because I have at least a couple of lawyers in my legal department, which is a lot less than what we're faced when we get sued left, right, and centre by NGOs and opponents, but they do insist that we put up a forward-looking statement as we're a publicly listed company. And Cloud Peak Energy is proud to be the only New York Stock Exchange company that's actually listed in Wyoming, even though we're also very proud to obviously have the operation in Spring Creek in southeast Montana. So all that says that anything forward-looking, I say you should take with a grain of salt. So the next slide. So I'll just cover a couple of slides, a little bit about Cloud Peak, so you understand how we sort of fit in the picture before I talk about Montana coal and then some of the issues we're facing both on exports, and I think what we need to be doing to try and make sure coal is part of the energy future for the US, and it will be for the world, but in a way that meets different social needs and concerns about potential climate issues. So, Cloud Peak Energy, we are one of the largest US coal producers. We actually span out Rio Tinto in 2009 and listed on the New York Stock Exchange. We produced 75 million tons of coal last year. That's down from 96 million tons in 2011, and is going to go down at least to, we'd be lucky if we do 65 million tons this year, which is a remarkable change for a business that really is, all the economics are built on stable, steady operations. And it sort of goes hand in glove with what Matt Rose from BNSF was saying in terms of the coal coming off so markedly. I'll go into the reasons for that, and they are sort of twofold at least, if not many morefold. But it's a dynamic environment we're working in, and we're trying to make sure that we keep Cloud Peak Energy in good shape to weather this storm and sort of come out to be part of the energy future for Montana, Wyoming, and for the US. So I think we do have a very good future, but we've got to make sure that we actually do everything we can to preserve it and make sure it works. Because at the moment, there's an awful lot of people who've actually sort of defined the answer to climate change and climate issues in the US is actually not burning coal. It's not actually reducing emissions. It's actually just not burning coal, and that's not actually a smart way to look at an issue, and it's very damaging for the US, and doesn't actually bode well for reducing emissions if indeed the world is warming up. So I should move on to just make sure you're aware where our mines are. The Spring Creek mine, which is Montana's largest mine, is just near Decker in southeast Montana. Then we have the Cordero Rojo mine just north of Gillette, and the Antelope mine in the southern Powder, the bottom of the Powder River Basin. We do have decent reserves at the moment, 1.1 billion tons. It's all federal coal, those reserves. But interestingly for us and for the future for Montana and for mining around Spring Creek, we do have the opportunity to work with the Crow tribe. We have an option agreement with them that we've been working on for several years to develop up to 1.4 billion tons of coal on the reservation. And I think that's going to become increasingly, I'll say valuable or increasingly economic as it becomes ever harder to lease federal coal in the environment we live in at the moment. We also have 300 million tons of coal at the Youngs Creek deposit just south of Spring Creek. It's actually in Wyoming, but it's adjacent to what we look at developing as a sort of complex over the next few years. The operations that we run, just so you can get a picture of us, we're all large surface mines, which is really what we have in this part of the world, apart from, I guess, the Signal Peak mine. We use the large equipment to move a lot of dirt very efficiently. We do focus very heavily on the safety of our operations. I'll come on to that in the next slide. We do also make sure that as we mine, we reclaim as we go by putting the dirt back from the hole we dig and then take the coal out. And we take pride in making sure we do that properly and that our systems work. And we've actually been ISO 14001 accredited for, I think, the last 10 years for all our environmental operations. And whilst in itself, that's a small thing, I think it's very important in reflection of the way we run the business. I'll now move on to the safety performance. My personal belief is that there's no reason why anybody should be injured either in the sort of short term or on an incident or have their long-term health compromised by working a coal mine. And that's a belief that we hold dear and a target at Cloud Peak Energy. As you can see from this graph here, it's actually 2014 numbers. Of the top 25 coal companies, Cloud Peak Energy is down at the bottom left-hand end. What that actually means is a number of 0.79 injuries per 200,000 hours worked. What it actually means is that you'd probably, if you came and worked for us, expect to get an injury, which might be a stitch or a pinched finger or something worse, like a broken bone, probably once every 200 years that you worked for us. And we want to get that down further, obviously. We spend a lot of time making sure that we run the operation safely because we believe it's not only is the right thing to do for the people, but it's also the right way to run the mines efficiently. If you get time, you can go over to our booth over here where we've actually brought a truck simulator that we use around the mines so that employees can actually, new employees and experienced employees, can get training and refresher training operating a haul truck in the safety of that booth rather than out on the haul roads at the mines. And Charla, Smokey, and Natalie would be happy to let you have a go in that if you're lucky enough to be at the front of the queue. It's a very nice piece of technology that costs an awful lot of money in its day, but I think has paid for itself many times by actually making sure we have the right people operating. People who operate the mines are actually well trained. So moving on to the domestic environment and moving away from Cloud Peak, quite frankly, it's very challenging. There's two big factors that I think have really impacted us in the last few years. One is quite clearly the advent of very low-cost natural gas. And you know, that is a fantastic boon for America. And if natural gas was to mean that in a fair competition that coal production was reduced, I'd be fine with that. I mean, that's innovation and competition. Unfortunately, the amount of gas that's coming out has actually let the other factor that's working against us, the regulatory environment, really take hold. One of the reasons that people in Washington can incentivize customers not to use coal, regulate not to, is because they do have the alternative of gas at the moment. I don't believe gas will stay at the very, very current low levels prices for the long term because, quite frankly, gas and oil companies are losing much more money than coal companies. Their price has to come up to some sort of sustainable level. If it does, then we will absolutely be able to compete in the Powder River Basin. Maybe not in the eastern coal fields, where their costs are higher and they will lose out, but I think in the West there is a long-term future for our coal because of its low cost and also the infrastructure that's already there to burn the coal. So I think gas on its own I'd be absolutely fine with, but gas plus the mandates, the encouragement, the litigation to encourage our customers not to burn coal, that's a pretty formidable combination. Obviously the regulation which Karen went through, the Clean Power Plan, it stayed, but quite frankly it doesn't really make too much difference because I think it's very, very important that it's litigated and it's found out whether the EPA is overreaching. But I think the important thing for us is the mindset of our utility customers. They're of the mindset that if it's not this set of regulation, there will be more coming. There's no coal plants being built in the US. There's just more being closed. And that's not actually a good thing for the US. As I'll come on to later when I talk about the things that maybe we should be doing, I think there's a much smarter way to go. But what we're finding is that in everything we do, or in government bodies who work with us and issue permits or leases or whatever, everyone's being sued. And quite often we're finding that the government bodies, whether it's for a permit or a lease, they're actually getting an existing leases being challenged, as we're finding at Spring Creek, that what the environmentalists are doing is going back and finding a foot fault in a process maybe 7 years ago when the lease was issued, and they're saying because of that maybe we should, and then they shop around to find a judge who's sympathetic, and then suddenly you've got a court case on your hands, as we have at Spring Creek, where were we to lose, we've actually mined half the coal that's covered by the issue, and it would actually devastate the mine in terms of actually having to stop, basically. And I'll come on to the economic benefit of the mine in a couple of slides, but it really is that uncertainty that's being created by the sheer resources against the coal and other fossil fuel industries is really quite extraordinary. And it wears you down. It also wears down the government bodies who are issuing the permits, and we find quite often they're increasingly inclined to settle with environmental litigants. And they seem to have the mindset, if you settle here, they'll go away, which is quite frankly naive. If you settle with somebody like that, that just moves the starting post for the next litigation, because they really do want the coal to stay in the ground and don't seem to take into account the economic and social impacts of doing that. And I'd argue the minute benefit that it might give to their cause if indeed it is reducing emissions of CO2. So where we're faced at the moment is we have an industry that is under severe financial stress. Of the 4 large PRB coal companies, 2 of them are in bankruptcy, and one of them is in very close. Thankfully, Cloud Peak isn't there yet, but we'll do everything we can to avoid that sort of financial distress. If we do, it'll be because the markets do actually stabilize, and also down to the fantastic work of the people at the mines who've been reducing costs in ways that I didn't believe was possible, and being very, very innovative in the way that they work. And I really would say that the work they do and the technology they deploy, it really is the makings of a high-tech summit if you just look at the things that we do at the mines every day. Now I'll move on to coal reserves and production, a quick look at Montana and some of the economic benefits. In terms of Montana, one of the things that's extraordinary is just the amount of coal here, 119 billion tons, a lot more, nearly double what's in Wyoming. But the production has been lower, and I'll come on to one of the factors for that on the next slide, but there is an awful lot of coal here. There's actually an awful lot of coal around the whole world, and coal will power the future of developing nations. And whilst the US produces maybe 800 million tons of coal this year, down from 1.1 billion a few years ago, China produces about 3.5 billion tons, and of the 9 billion tons in the whole world being dug up. But as countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, India, and China itself look to make sure they've got enough power, more coal will be dug up. And I'd advocate that we should be looking at ways to actually capture the emissions from that coal rather than pretending it's going to be kept in the ground. It's not actually going to be in America. America's going to get a lot of its power from coal in the future. But unfortunately, that's become a sort of byline and a rallying point for anti-coal people that's not really very helpful if we're worried about the climate and the future economies of these different states. So moving on to the next slide. This graph actually just, I think it is important because it actually shows production in Wyoming and Montana since 1970. The story there is there was massive growth in Wyoming, Montana didn't. The reason I say for that is it's about the time that Montana increased its tax rates to 30% when Wyoming's was 17%. So I think policy and taxation does have a massive impact. Now, I'm not advocating for Montana to change that. I'm just putting the slide up because I was asked to talk about the history of Montana coal. Wyoming's coming off. Montana will come off, as I'll say in the next slide or two, but it is quite remarkable. The difference there is that certainly last year, whilst Wyoming ended up netting from taxation about $1.15 directly from coal tax, Montana was getting $2.23. But obviously you can see in total, Wyoming got a lot more money. So it is interesting how tax and money does drive the way things work. In terms of where our customers are for Montana coal, it tends to be along the northern states where the geographic advantage is. And about 10 million tons are consumed in Montana, 22 million tons by other states. Last year, the Spring Creek mine produced about 17 million tons of coal, so it's the biggest miner there. The other thing that we have been talking about is the ability to export this coal. Last year, Montana exported coal to Canada, Chile, Japan, Hong Kong, and South Korea. There is a real demand growth in those areas. At the moment, this year, we're not looking to export any coal because, unfortunately, the international markets are oversupplied. And that means the prices are too low for us to export. I think longer term, the demand will grow, and certainly the customers are very, very keen for the ports to be developed because they would like, when they're building power plants that are going to last 40 years in Japan, they want to know where the coal's coming from, and they would much rather it came from an ally such as the US rather than from Russia or Indonesia, which maybe wouldn't be quite such reliable suppliers. But unfortunately, at the moment, we're really struggling to get those ports built, as you've heard a few times, and I'll touch on that again. In terms of the economic impact of the Spring Creek mine, we have 245 employees. Average full-time employees, their pay is about $70,000, and that's without benefits, which might range between $50,000 and $20,000. So the underside of $90,000 an employee, which obviously in Montana is a pretty good number. The goods and services that we give to the community, I think in the Billings area, we probably estimate we have an impact of about $18 million. Last year, state and federal tax and royalties that came to Montana from that 17 million tons of coal, about $52 million. The bad news for that is going down just based upon the amount of tons we're going to be able to ship from Spring Creek this year. It's probably going to be down by about maybe $33 million, $35 million, depending on how many tons we ship, which is quite a big change. Similarly, the impact in Wyoming is even more significant. And of that, the other thing I would point out, particularly when people are talking about how coal companies, we don't pay enough for the leases and we don't pay enough royalties. Last year we paid $303 million in taxes and royalties, and we made no money. And we can't afford to buy new leases. So when people say that, I'm afraid it's not actually justified, but it's not about that. It's about keeping the coal in the ground. And the fact that there's a sympathetic audience is pretty frightening. In terms of the things we do, we support the local communities. We're very active because these are the communities that we live and work in and where employees work. So we want to make sure that we do that, and particularly with the Crow tribe, who we have a strong relationship with. In terms of potential development projects, I should touch on Spring Creek, because I think this really is a bright spot. At Spring Creek, on that little diagram there, you can see the top right-hand corner is where we're mining. The sort of shaded area is all the land we own in recent purchases. And to the west, to the left, is the Crow Indian Reservation, where the 1.4 billion tons of coal is. And then just down to the south is the Youngs Creek project. This is very important because a lot of that coal, the Youngs Creek and Crow Reservation coal, big metal coal, is not federal coal. And I believe there's a great opportunity not only to develop this for exports, if we get a port built, and when the market comes back, but also for the domestic market. Because even if the Clean Power Plan was put in place, and obviously there's an awful lot of questions about that, the projections around that suggested that 25% of America's electricity would still come from coal if it was fully implemented by 2030. So there's going to be a lot of coal burnt in America. It's not going to zero. Unfortunately, it just feels like it at the moment as we go to a pretty steep decline. So this project, I believe, will come into the money, particularly if access to federal coal in Wyoming is limited. So there is a good story there. So we need to make sure we continue with the permitting of that, and obviously, like with the ports, it just takes forever because it's much more easy to hold things up than to actually progress them. But we're very focused on this and working with the Crow tribe to make sure that we could actually bring some some jobs and some prosperity by mining their coal, which I'd be very excited to do. In terms of the international prices, I should just quickly cover those just to explain why we're not exporting at the moment. Commodities are cyclical, and there was a tremendous run-up in 2008 in international Newcastle prices, which is the benchmark, and they've actually come down to historic lows. They will go back up because just like with gas, around the world people are closing coal mines because they're not making money, and demand is still growing, unlike the US. So it will come back, and we'll wait and see what China does. They're the big sort of unknown at the moment because they are so significant. But the long-term demand, the future for coal in Montana, I think, is very positive. It's positive domestically because of the limitations on federal coal and because of the potential, certainly for us, around the Spring Creek complex. Internationally, because the demand is growing. And the other reason that Montana coal has an advantage internationally, he says, is two really nice advantages compared to the Southern Powder River Basin coal in Wyoming. One is it's closer to the ports, the existing port at West Shore and the ports we're trying to get permitted and built. The other one is actually has an energy advantage. Those things in mining are really quite nice because you can't be taken away. We obviously then have to compete internationally with mines all around the world, which is tough at the moment. But within the U.S. Market reserves, looking at supplying Asia, Montana's in great shape. It's got great coal and it's in the right place. It's closer to the ports. So we do need ports built and we do need the market to come back. But we're very focused on making sure that this opportunity is ready when those things happen. And I think, overall, Montana, the future for coal is good, though it's pretty tough just at the moment, as it is for everyone. Now, as I come on, I would like to talk about the solutions to people's concerns about coal. If you reckon that people, there's legitimate concerns, is the world warming up or not? And clearly there's a whole range of views, but it's a reality that people want to take action about that for whatever reasons. The thing that I'd point out is that, well, at the moment, certainly in the US, the issues I said before is that the solution to all climate woes is not burning coal. It's not actually reducing CO2 emissions. And that message has been taken and carried very effectively by special interest groups, NGOs, people who want subsidies for windmills or whatever, and they've run very hard with it. Unfortunately, they're not actually going to reduce emissions in the US significantly, and certainly around the world, not enough to actually meet their desires to reduce emissions. And that's very worrying. I think there is a future for coal, but it's actually if you're worried about climate, to actually do the things that the IPCC scientists who actually identify the big problem and are wheeled out to say that it's all going to be terrible if we don't do something about CO2, they actually write another report about what to do. Unfortunately, it's not referenced very much by most of the very strong advocates of what we should do about climate change. The implementation report that came out in 2014 says, first of all, you need to do lots of nuclear, and then you absolutely must develop carbon capture and storage, not just for coal, but for gas. Because whilst gas has got half the emissions of coal, it's still got half the emissions of coal, and that's not going to get you down to 10% or whatever reductions people believe that you should target in a long time. And the actual IPCC report in 2014 said if you don't develop this technology, the cost of meeting a 2-degree warming target could be 138% higher, and most of them said it probably is just physically impossible to do it. So I find it quite remarkable that there isn't actually more support from the people who claim they are most concerned about climate change, about the support for the technology that their scientists, or the scientists that they cite to say there's an issue, say must be developed. I think there's a great opportunity in Montana to actually be a leader in developing carbon capture and storage technology. And it's developing and commercializing and deploying. It's not about, we're beyond bench levels. This is technology that works. It's maybe where we were 15 or 20 years ago with windmills saying, well, they're just too expensive. We need subsidies or we need help to actually build the next 100 so that the ones after that are much cheaper. What we need in America is to actually be building the next boundary dam module, which is the Sask Power in Canada, their thing where they've retrofitted an existing coal plant with a carbon capture unit, which is working pretty well. And those guys would say the next one they could build for 60% of the capital cost of the first one, because you do learn, you do come through. So I wouldn't advocate that it's economic now, and opponents of it would say, well, look, it's just not economic. Well, no, it's about as economic as the first windmill. We need to actually get on and develop them. I think there is a real opportunity to actually look at the technology and maybe ask for federal funding to commercialize and deploy this sort of technology. If you reckon at the moment that the US spends $11 billion a year subsidizing wind and solar, which supposedly are commercial, to me it's quite staggering that the supporters of that technology say, look, it's as cheap as coal, isn't that wonderful? when they're getting $11 billion of subsidies. I'd advocate that some of that money should go towards the commercialization and deployment and the building of boundary dams number 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'd also say, why couldn't one or two of those be at Colstrip? Montana is actually very well placed with existing plants and with the geological formations for enhanced oil recovery or for long-term storage that actually makes it pretty amenable to that sort of technology. And there is actually some great work being done in DC. It's very rare you'd say that, but to actually support this, and I know Senator Daines is a strong supporter of the Conway bill, which is to actually extend the carbon capture and storage 45Q tax credit. We're big advocates of that. And as I say, I'd just like to take some of the $11 billion that goes to wind and solar, and actually, which supposedly is commercial, and actually put that to deployment of this technology. Because then coal could be part of the answer rather than the problem. And actually, most people in the middle of this debate aren't sure whether the world's warming up or not, but would like something to be done about it. This isn't, to me, a political debate, and I'd rather leave either end of the spectrums about what should be done out of it and actually say, well, maybe we should do something, treat this rather than an emotional political issue, the climate, rather treat it more as an economic and technical problem, because then we can fix it. But if you get emotion and politics in, you're not going to get very far, and I'm afraid that's where we've got, where the situation we're in at the moment. So, just to wind up, if I can, I'd say that coal, first of all, is not going to go away, but we are going through a massive dislocation, part through gas and part through, and greatly increased by the regulation, the environment we're in, the social, political environment we're in. Montana has extensive low-cost coal reserves. It can actually, it's going to be rocky for a year or two, but it could actually see this as a potential long-term pillar or building block of the economy as it has been in the past. And I would certainly say that, unlike Wyoming, Montana's economy is not so dependent on fossil fuels. It's a big part, but it's not as dependent. When people talk about diversifying from fossil fuels, I think it should be about diversifying to add other things as well, not just getting rid of them. That's not diversification, that's jumping horses. And at the moment, it doesn't make any sense. The other thing I would say is the Big Metal Project, the non-federal coal. We have a tremendous opportunity with the Crow tribe to actually develop a real meaningful coal mines there that would bring amazing benefits to the tribe, which I think, as many people are aware, would be very useful given the level of income and the living standards on the reservation. So we're really focused on that because we think it's the right thing to do. International coal demand is growing and exports will recommence from the US. It's a cyclical market, they will come back. We've just got to be ready when we can, which is why it's so important that we get the mine permitted and obviously the ports permitted. I would like to thank Senator Daines and Congressman Zinke for their support in that. They've been fantastic in terms of actually trying to push that forward, but gosh, it's hard work. We'll just have to see how it goes. It's not going to happen soon. But we need to keep pushing, because if it doesn't, if you can't build a port for coal, then as someone else said, maybe you can't build one for GMO crops or for something else that anybody doesn't like, and that just isn't smart for America. And the last thing I would say is Montana can play a big part in commercializing CCUS, and I think that gives coal a real future and becomes part of the answer and the talking points for the what do we do in a new society, whether the world wants it or not, and we can decide that later. But let's develop the technology now, and actually then that keeps coal part of the mix rather than being part of the answer rather than being defined as the problem, and I just don't think that's good for anyone, certainly not for Montana. So with that, I've droned on and used all my time, so there's no time for questions, but I thank you very much for your attention. I hope some of that makes some sense. Thank you.
Well, we've got a panel coming up next. This is going to be a supercharged panel. And so, if you're on the panel, this is the impacts of energy policy. I'd like to have you come forward as I introduce. It's Travis Kavula, Tim Fox, Dr. Barkey, Colin Marshall, and John Hines. Why don't you make your way up here to the panel?